everyone, JenniferMaker here. Today I want to share my best tips for saving money on sublimation. Whether you're just starting out or have been sublimating for a while, stretching your crafting budget is always important. There are so many fun things to try, but how can you get the most for your dollar? And sublimation can seem more expensive to start because it usually requires a special printer, ink, and items made for sublimation. But what if there were ways to stretch your sublimation dollar? There are, and I'm going to share them all with you today. These are steps that you can take in all the different parts of the sublimation crafting journey, no matter if you've already started with this technique or you're still deciding if it's right for you. Plus, I'll share links to lots of my free tutorials where I use some of these tips. That's why I have all of these fun sublimation tools, materials, and items to show you today. If even just one of these tips helps you, then my mission is complete. Sublimation money-saving tip number 1, start simple. My first tip is that it's possible that you don't need to spend a lot of money to try sublimation at all. Before I started sublimating, I'd heard a lot about it, but it was always about how to use a sublimation printer. I didn't really want another printer just for this one craft. Back then, yes, I have them now, but back then, I didn't want to get another printer. And I know some of you might feel the same way. But sublimation isn't limited to printed designs. You can get the same vibrant, long-lasting results using sublimation markers, pens, and pre-printed sheets. Cricut offers all 3 options in their infusible ink product line, so you might already have some. I use the infusible ink pens and markers, I have written them right here, to make pretty watercolor style mugs, and the pattern transfer sheets to make fun ornaments. My Cricut did most of the work drawing the outline or cutting the shapes. But if you don't have a Cricut, there are also freehand markers and other products that don't require a cutting machine or printer. All of these options are a lot less expensive and are easier to use when you are new and you want to just learn about sublimation. You will have to use compatible blanks, but more on that soon, don't worry. Remember, you also need a powerful heat source to sublimate that special ink. So that's a tool other than a home iron, which doesn't get hot enough for sublimation. But again, you don't have to invest in a special press right away for these projects if you have something like a Cricut Easy Press or the mug press already. So take a look around at your options to try sublimation before investing in a printer and the supplies to print your own transfers. Sublimation money-saving tip number 2, don't get a printer right away. Now you might be thinking, infusible ink transfer sheets, pens, markers, paints, those sound fun, but they won't let me put my favorite photo on a tumbler. And yes, you're right, but that doesn't mean you need to go right out and buy a sublimation printer to make your dream project. Instead, it's easy to have your designs printed by someone else using their printer. Yes, there are many people on Etsy and other sites who have already invested in a sublimation printing setup and will print your files for a small price. Check their reviews to make sure customers are happy with the results, and I do recommend getting a few prints made in case of mistakes, but this is another way to try sublimation out without spending a lot of money. Plus, sublimation prints can sit for quite a while and still transfer really well, so you don't have to use them all at once. Just keep them flat, dry, and out of direct sunlight. Sublimation money-saving tip number 3, test your process. Whichever sublimation process you're using, don't jump right in and sublimate on an expensive blank right away. There are a lot of variables in sublimation, such as material, the blank that you're decorating, temperature, pressure, time, and more. So it's a really good idea to try out your design, color settings, and materials on a less expensive option with the same qualities if possible. For example, if you want to sublimate a design on a nice white polyester shirt, but you only have one shirt, don't risk a bad transfer. Instead, find an old t-shirt, a scrap of polyester fabric, or another item with the same color and fiber content, and test your design there first. Or you might be able to find a similar item at a lower cost at a discount store. When I'm testing new techniques, I can often find something close enough to my blank at Dollar Tree, right? Cute little, they're just microfiber washcloths, super easy and super inexpensive. Just make sure the surface is the same as the blank you eventually want to decorate, because different colors or content can create totally different results. Or if you do make a mistake on a blank, record what happened. Then see if there's another spot that you can try a second test with adjusted settings before you go and press a new blank. Then that can be your test one, right? And it's still helpful. Sublimation money-saving tip number 4, get the right tools for you. When you decide to start printing on your own, select a printer that will fit your needs, and that's not going to be the same printer for everyone. When picking a sublimation printer, the big things I consider are ease of use, price over time, and any special features. But there are other differences like software, computer compatibility, and size. You will have to do some research, pick 1 or 2 aspects that are most important to you, and see which printer fits your needs best. If you need help choosing, my guide over at JenniferMaker.com/best sublimation printer is a good place to start. I think the ease of use and price are the most common considerations, and they're very important. While I've converted several relatively inexpensive Epson EcoTank printers, their setup, maintenance, and fine-tuning does take more time and effort than, say, a more expensive Sawgrass sublimation printer that will work awesome right out of the box. My Sawgrass printer also came with great software that lets me control the color settings and perform maintenance tasks to avoid clogs. And while I love my converted Epson EcoTank, working with different printer profiles for specific designs can take a while. And if I don't print something about once a week, it can get clogged. That's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. So if you know yourself and know that you don't want to convert a printer or think about maintenance, a Sawgrass has built-in maintenance processes that might be a better fit if it's in your budget. If the less expensive Epson EcoTank stays in the box unused because you don't want to convert it or it's clogged all the time, but having a printer that you can use practically out of the box will get you crafting faster, the second option is a better result. I feel the same way about special heat presses. You don't have to go out and buy all the heat presses and their accessories right away. Remember, certain heat presses will work best for certain projects, so it pays to think about what kind of projects you're most interested in when purchasing one. If you mostly want to sublimate, say, flat items like shirts, signs, or flags, an easy press or a clamshell press will cover most of your needs. However, think about how large your projects will be, because most designs work best if they're pressed all at once. Repeated pressing, especially like in sections, can sometimes give you inconsistent results or create like double lines, kind of like smudge transfers. Of course, sometimes you can't avoid it on large projects, and I do have tutorials on how to tile designs. But if you know that you're going to want to press, say, a lot of extra large t-shirts, make sure that your heat plate is large enough for the majority of your designs. So try to get a large flat press instead of trying to make do with the mini press, because you'll get frustrated and we'll go through more supplies and more blanks that way. Sublimation money-saving tip number 5, get to know your supplies. There are some standard materials that you'll probably use for a lot of projects, no matter which kind of sublimation item you're working on. I have lots of information on them in my sublimation cookbook, but some of the really common items are sublimation paper, sublimation ink, white cardstock, white uncoated butcher paper, and heat-resistant tape. So since you'll be using them more often, learn how you can use these materials correctly for the best results, but also efficiently to keep your crafting costs down. When it comes to sublimation paper and ink, make sure you're buying supplies that are compatible with your printer, because they aren't all interchangeable. And if your print looks dull, don't assume it's a mistake and start over. Remember, sublimation ink will look more vibrant after it's transferred because it's like heat activated. So that dull print might be totally fine, right? I have found that sublimation ink also has a shelf life. So try your best to use it up before the date on the packaging so you get your money's worth. You can also get better results sublimating on soft surfaces like blankets or shirts by tearing away the extra paper around the design instead of cutting it. Ripping the paper, which I call feathering, creates a gradual edge instead of a harsh cut. And since the heat and the pressure required for good sublimation is so strong, it's easy to actually press the edge of a piece of sublimation paper right into the surface. So you'll end up with like a faint line around your design. They can be hard to get out, so save yourself a redo by learning how to feather your paper. And while sublimation paper and ink are consumables, there are more ways to save when it comes to protective papers and sublimation tape. Most importantly, use the right kind of protective papers for the best sublimation results. I mostly use plain white cardstock under a project to protect the back of a layered blank or my pressing area, and plain white butcher paper on top to protect the heat source. A big roll of this butcher paper will last you a really long time and work well because it lets moisture through while still protecting the surfaces from direct heat. Moisture is a bad thing. We don't want moisture when we're sublimating. It can create a blurry sublimation design. So that's why we always make sure that everything is dry and preheat our blanks to remove any wrinkles or dampness. There are definitely protective coverings that you should avoid. Don't use freezer paper. Don't use wax paper because they're both coated and can interfere with your transfer. Similarly, Teflon sheets and parchment paper are used for some heat pressing projects, but typically they don't work for sublimation because they can trap moisture. And for your cardstock, its main role is to catch any excess ink during sublimation, so you don't accidentally get ink on the back of a shirt or transfer it onto like your pressing pad. That does mean that some ink will likely get on the cardstock, and that's important to keep in mind because if you reheat sublimation ink to a high enough temperature, even little specks, it can reactivate and transfer to a new surface, like your next project. So I always recommend using new cardstock and butcher paper, which I know can feel wasteful, especially for big projects. Instead, find another use for the materials that you can't reuse for sublimation. White cardstock can still be cut up by a Cricut if you have one, and butcher paper makes great packing material, even if it has some sublimation ink on it. The color won't rub off on anything else. And if you have clean, heat-resistant tape, like the pieces you use to secure protective paper around a mug, they can be reused a few times as long as ink hasn't gotten onto it. These little tips might seem small, but they can add up. Sublimation money-saving tip number 6, big plans, buy in bulk. When you're shopping for sublimation supplies or blanks, see if you can buy more than one of the item, especially if it's a project that you plan to make again or as a backup in case of mistakes. But instead of buying, say, 4 single sublimation mugs, see if a small multi-pack is available. With a little math, you may find that the price per item is lower that way. Now, I don't want you to always buy multiples of items you don't need because space is often limited and having unfinished projects in your creative space can be stressful, right? But another option is to split an order with a sublimation buddy if you have one. Next time you want to try a new project, ask them if they're interested in splitting the cost of a larger order with you. That way you only have to make one trip to the store or pay one shipping fee, and you might still get a lower price per item on top of that. And if you're making a lot of a project, some stores like Dollar Tree's website, Cricut's website, and Amazon sellers do offer bulk pricing. Sublimation money-saving tip number 7, take your time and prepare for success. You might want to get right to the pressing. I get it. It's exciting to see how your project will turn out. But taking your time with sublimation, especially in the beginning, will save you money in the long run. So slow down and do the things that will create a better result. When you're preparing a file, Measure the sublimation compatible area instead of going by the dimensions on the packaging, because the dimensions on the packaging could be wrong. And you don't want to waste supplies by printing a new copy at the correct size, right? So before you get to printing, also check your spelling if you've added any words or a name, because that can be an embarrassing mistake. And don't forget to mirror. Nearly all of your sublimation prints should be mirrored or flipped, because you want the ink side to go against your surface. There are important steps for preparing different blanks too, so always check for tips. Blanks with hard surfaces might have a protective film that you need to remove, so you're sublimating the item, not the film. Sometimes they're really hard to see, but a weeding tool can help lift an edge. Others, like a lot of mugs, don't have a protective film, so always check the blank for defects like scratches in the surface or discoloration so you don't put a perfect transfer on an imperfect item. Lint or dust can also get between the ink and the surface, so use a lint roller or some rubbing alcohol on a lint-free cloth to remove any debris before you press. And soft surfaces take preparation too. Use a lint roller to remove any debris or loose strings that could grab some of your ink. And if it's fluffy like a blanket, smooth the fibers all in the same direction so they catch the ink on the correct sides. And always, always, always pre-press. I learned the hard way that pre-pressing really does matter because it smooths wrinkles and removes moisture. Moisture is not our friend because it causes unevenness and blurriness in our transfers. And just like wrinkles can cause uneven transfers, so can things like seams or zippers. They keep the design and heat from creating a tight seal, and you need that to keep the ink in place while it turns from a solid on the paper to a gas and then back to a solid on the blank. I love using tools to make things easier, like heat-safe pressing pillows. You can use ones of different sizes to lift the design area away from seams or zippers to make a better seal. I also like to use pinchers or silicone bands to keep tumbler wraps in place for the same reason. They can also help you blend seam, which can make all the difference in how a finished tumbler looks. You also want to put the design in the right spot, so use tools like my t-shirt guides to position prints. And once you have everything in the right spot, taping really matters. I admit I've tried to tape too quickly and it never ends well. So use enough heat-resistant tape to keep your design in place and very tight and smooth against your blank. That's another way to keep ink from shifting around during sublimation too. Sublimation money-saving tip number 8, don't give up if it doesn't work. So even with perfect preparation, sometimes a project just doesn't come out how you expect. Or maybe you went a little light on the taping and there's a blurry spot. But don't throw it out until you've given it some thought. Is the issue in a spot that you can repress, maybe? Or could you add a new design element over it? If it's a tumbler, adding a removable tumbler boot can hide a little seam gap or some white at the bottom because those can be tough to get perfect. Plus, the boot protects your tumbler and makes it harder to knock over too, so bonus. Or see if you can remove or lighten the ink. It really depends on the item, the design, and what you want the end result to be, but it's worth investigating. I managed to lighten the ink on some tumblers enough that I could resublimate a new, darker design on top, and you can hardly tell that there was ever anything else there. Another really fun option is to cover up any mistakes with vinyl, like stickers or even glitter. But remember, a mug with a few blemishes still works to hold your coffee and tea, and a slightly blurry t-shirt is still perfect for a beach day. So it's not the end of the world. Right? It's okay if something isn't perfect. Nothing handmade is supposed to be perfect. So give yourself some grace and enjoy that you made something really cool. Probably no one is going to notice. Seriously. Sublimation money-saving tip number 9, take care of your work. So please do not destroy your hard work by not taking care of your items when you're done. Even if you didn't spend a lot on a project, redoing it doubles the cost. So always check the care instructions, and if you're gifting an item, include the instructions to help the recipient enjoy your work and care for it. I always list the care instructions with my projects, usually at the end of the video, but definitely on the blog post that goes with it. For example, don't just throw your beautiful new sublimation shirt in with your bed sheets. Getting them too hot could lighten the ink. And since the ink becomes part of the surface, damage to the shirt is damage to the design. So wait at least 24 hours after sublimating, and then turn your shirt inside out and wash it on gentle with cool water and mild detergent. And I usually hang my shirts to dry or tumble dry them on low. For hard surfaces, you can put projects in the dishwasher if the blank says it's safe, but hand washing with gentle products will help them last longer. There are some dishwashers that get so hot that I have seen them fade the sublimation design, so keep that in mind. It hasn't happened to me, but I've seen evidence on the internet. And don't scrub with things like mugs because a scratch on the surface is a scratch on the design. I have seen sunlight fade sublimated items, so you want to keep them out of direct sunlight too. Or if you need to, you can add a clear protective layer for things like wind spinners that are meant to enjoy the sun. Sublimation money saving tip number 10, think outside the box. Once you've been sublimating for a while, you'll learn how to work with different kinds of blanks, and you'll probably get curious about what else you can sublimate. I used to think that it was just items made for sublimation that we could sublimate, but there's so much more that we can decorate, especially if you learn how to add sublimation-friendly coatings to fun new things. I've used laminating pouches, sprays, and specific iron-on vinyl to make things that shouldn't work with sublimation into some of my favorite projects. And since they weren't produced or marketed specifically for sublimation, sometimes these are a good way to save money. I found some of my favorite sublimation project blanks at discount stores like Dollar Tree. And if you find an item that you like online, sign up for the retailer's newsletter or follow them on social media, because those are great ways to hear about sales. That's a good way to save on normal supplies too, like heat-resistant tape, white cardstock, things like that. Now, I always watch for deals on things with polyester or polymer content because that might work, right? Plus, I know I can make wood, aluminum, acrylic, and other blanks work with a little extra preparation, so it's always on my mind. When you put everything you learn together and get comfortable with these tools and materials, you can get really creative. Of course, remember that sublimation does require pressure and high heat, so don't assume everything will work and be safe. Always check the packaging for warnings about heating or compressing an item before you start experimenting. Remember, safety first. Sublimation money saving tip number 11, treat your tools well. Taking care of your crafting space and tools will save you lost time and money in the long run. If you don't put things away, it's easy to lose track of items. I have definitely misplaced a pressing pad or a fun blank I wanted to try, and then had to go buy a new one, or had forgotten I had something already, so I wound up with duplicates. That's time, money, and space you're using up. Keep everything in its place, and it's so much easier to avoid this. Also, take time to care for your tools, especially the expensive ones like printers and presses. For a printer, learn about the best maintenance steps to keep it running smoothly. Remembering to print a sheet every week might sound annoying, but if it keeps the lines clear, you will save time troubleshooting. And running intensive cleaning cycles can shorten the life of your printer, so a little preventive care is best. For heat presses, keep them clean so excess ink doesn't build up and start transferring to future projects. It's also a good idea to check their temperatures using a heat-safe thermometer to be sure they're working correctly. If a crafting tool isn't performing correctly, you could have all the settings correct, but not create the correct environment for success. So keep an eye on your tools to save yourself a lot of lost time and money. Sublimation money saving tip number 12, don't spend money if you don't have to. So please, please, please don't feel like you need expensive software to print transfers, because there are a lot of free tools to help stretch your crafting budget. My Epson EcoTank doesn't have special printing software, and while I could use a paid program, I prefer printing from Google Docs, which is a totally free tool. I even design in there sometimes. If you want more control, Canva has fantastic design tools and resources as part of their free level. Also, Sublimation files come in different formats, including PDFs, but Adobe also has a free PDF reader you can use if you come across any that you need to open. There are also free tools to edit your images, like background removers, and lots of helpful things over at iloveimg.com, as well as other sites I've found. So take a look around to find a reputable free tool before you choose to pay for a new one. Sublimation money-saving tip number 13, use the right size paper. While I'm a big fan of big sizes of sublimation paper, that's only because I either make big designs or put lots of designs onto one sheet. But what if you're just printing one or two small designs? If you're doing that, you're going to end up wasting a lot of sublimation paper, which can get pricey. If you find you regularly print small things, like say mug wraps, you can use smaller paper. For example, you can buy mug-size sublimation paper and put that in your printer instead. Your printer paper tray is adjustable, and you can slide your paper tray guides in to hold the smaller paper. Just make sure your paper is centered in the paper tray when you place it in. And then when you go to print, make sure you change your paper size to match what you put into your printer. Sublimation money-saving tip number 14, don't waste blanks. Blanks are expensive, and I do not want you to waste them. So here are two things I do to avoid it myself. First, double and triple check that there is no protective film on your blank that needs to be removed before you press. You'll usually find the protective film on metals and acrylics so they don't get scratched during transit. If you press on a blank with the film still on it, it will look super weird, it won't look good, and you really won't be able to rescue it. To check if you have a film, lightly scrape at the corner with your fingernail to see if you can feel or see the film. And be sure to check both sides too. If you find the film, be sure to remove it before pressing. Another thing you can do to avoid wasting blanks is to print out your design on regular, less expensive paper and on the fast setting and see if it looks right and fits properly. This is particularly helpful if you're trying to fit something tricky like tumblers, mugs, wind spinners, and so on. You can catch so many mistakes with just a quick test print like this. Sublimation money-saving tip number 15, find free designs you can use. If you're not ready to make your own sublimation files, don't worry. There are many talented designers and artists selling sublimation templates and designs online through Etsy, Creative Fabrica, Design Bundles, or their own websites. And if you love a design, purchasing from them is the perfect way to support creative businesses. But until you're ready to do that, there are lots of ways to find free sublimation files to learn with. I have hundreds of sublimation ready files in my free resource library over at JenniferMaker.com/library. I'd love to see what you make with them. Just like any digital file, it's important to use sublimation designs ethically and legally. So that means you shouldn't just download any image from the internet and sublimate it on a blank because that can lead to trouble, especially if you try to sell the finished product. So always check the license and usage information of a file before choosing to use it on a project because a lawsuit is really expensive. I'm just saying to always be careful. And those are my top money-saving sublimation tips. I really hope you learned a thing or two, or if you have a tip, I would love to hear from you. One more bonus tip, sublimation has a lot of variables. What works for me and my machines might not be perfect for you because of your local humidity, your printer, the press you're using, or any number of factors. So be patient. Expect to make a few mistakes and learn from them. But most importantly, have fun, because crafting is supposed to be and should be a way to express yourself and not just be a source of stress. One of the things I get the most enjoyment out of is seeing what others have made. I have a fantastic Facebook group called Sublimation Made Easy. It's a fun, helpful community of people of all different skill levels sharing their projects, ideas, questions, and tips. I've learned a lot from them, and so can you. You can join us over at JenniferMaker.com/sublimation group. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope you had fun and learned something. Until next time, this is Jennifer Maker reminding you to craft a life you love.